ready for this? Oh,
Like it like that. Hey yo, listen.
drop it low to the flow. Oh,
Like it like that.
yeah. Oh, are you ready for this?
Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today we're heading to southern Africa to explore Zambia's economic outlook as we head towards 2025.
Sounds fascinating.
We've got some interesting stuff to unpack. Articles from Reuters, economic analyses, the whole shebang. The big question looming over everything is Zambia's recovery. They're dealing with a pretty rough drought and a debt crisis all at the same time.
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be in for sure.
They're really pinning their hopes on mining to pull them through, but is that a viable strategy?
Well, it's definitely a bold one. I mean, Zambia is aiming to hit 1 million tons of copper output by 2026. And eventually, they're talking 3 million.
Whoa, hold on. 3 million tons of copper. That's a lot of copper.
The finance minister seems pretty optimistic, though, projecting growth at 6.6% for this year.
Okay, but what's fueling that projected growth? Is it just all about copper, or are there other things happening behind the scenes?
Copper is definitely a major player, of course.
Sure.
The global demand is high, and if Zambia can capitalize on that, it could bring in some serious revenue.
Yeah.
But it's not the whole story.
There's more.
Right. The government has also been working on diversifying the economy, investing in agriculture, tourism, even energy projects.
That makes sense. Diversification is key, right? Can't put all your eggs in one basket, especially when it's a basket as unpredictable as commodity prices.
Exactly. We've seen what happens when countries get too reliant on a single commodity. Prices drop, and their economies tank. It's like the oil curse, where oil-rich countries struggle with development because they're so dependent on those exports.
Right. So even with these efforts to diversify, we can't ignore the impact of that drought in 2024. The articles say it forced the government to revise growth estimates way down to just 1.2%. That's a huge drop. Makes you think about how vulnerable even basic resources can be.
No kidding. This drought was the worst in a long time, like the worst anyone can remember. It really exposed just how fragile Zambia's agricultural sector still is. And it raises some serious questions about what climate change could mean for them in the future.
Speaking of climate change, did you notice how the articles barely touch on the long-term impacts of this drought? I mean, Zambia is banking on mining, which is a really water-intensive industry. What happens if they keep getting hit with these droughts?
That's a great question. Zambia definitely needs to start thinking seriously about a long-term climate adaptation strategy. Drought-resistant crops, better water management, maybe even exploring alternative energy sources so they're not so reliant on hydropower, which of course is vulnerable to drought.
So it's like their economic recovery plan has to go hand in hand with a climate resilience plan. They're kind of intertwined.
Absolutely. And while we're talking about big challenges, we can't forget about the elephant in the room, right? That debt crisis.
Ugh, yeah. Zambia was the first African nation to default on its debt during COVID, if I remember correctly. And that's not the kind of thing you bounce back from easily.
You're right. Dealing with this debt is going to be crucial for Zambia's long-term economic stability. The good news is it looks like they've reached a deal to restructure 90% of their external debt.
Debt restructuring. Okay, that sounds promising. But what does that actually mean for Zambia, and what kind of debt are we talking about here?
It's a mix, really. Loans from different sources, private creditors, multilateral institutions like the World Bank, and even other countries. China especially has become a major lender in Africa, and Zambia owes them a lot. This restructuring deal basically involves extending payment deadlines, maybe lowering interest rates, even potentially forgiving some of the debt.
So it gives Zambia some breathing room, right? Frees up
Yeah.
resources so they can focus on development instead of just scrambling to make those debt repayments.
Exactly.
But what about the other 10% of the debt? And how will this deal with China and others affect their relationships with those lenders?
Those are really important questions, and to be honest, the answers are complex. I think the details of that remaining debt and the potential geopolitical implications of this whole restructuring are worth their own deep dive sometime. But the bottom line is this debt relief is a huge GE step for Zambia, but it's not a cure-all.
They still got work to do.
Definitely.
So they need to use this opportunity wisely. They've bought themselves some time, but they've still got to address those underlying vulnerabilities we talked about. The reliance on mining and that ever-present threat of climate change. Are there any other moves Zambia could be making to try and ensure sustainable growth?
Well, there's one promising development. Have you heard about the Zambia-Tanzania interconnector project? It's a pretty major investment in energy infrastructure, aimed at boosting access to affordable and sustainable energy.
And reliable electricity. That could really be transformative for Zambia, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's not just about keeping the lights on. It's about unlocking economic potential in so many different ways. Businesses, schools, hospitals, just daily life for people.
It's about powering progress, basically.
Exactly.
Okay, but all this talk about reliable electricity, it makes me think back to those mines. Zambia's depending on reliable power is crucial for those operations, too. Seems like everything keeps coming back to mining. Do you think that singular focus is really a good idea in the long run? I mean, we have this analysis here that argues Zambia is actually doing better than a lot of other African nations when it comes to things like economic and political stability.
It's true, they've made some positive strides in those areas, but I think it's important to look beyond just the headlines. Yes, they have relative political stability, and they've seen some economic progress. But let's not forget about the 60% of the population who are still living below the poverty line, and that dependence on copper prices. It hasn't magically disappeared. Zambia needs to find a way to translate economic growth into actual tangible improvements in people's lives.
You're right. It's not just about GDP growth. It's about making sure that growth is actually reaching everyday Zambians and improving their quality of life. So, all things considered, are they on the right track? What does the future hold for Zambia?
It's hard to say for sure. It's a real mixed bag, honestly. There's definitely potential. The mining sector can provide a much-needed boost, and the debt restructuring gives them some breathing room, but they need to be smart about how they leverage these opportunities.
So let's say you were advising Zambia's leaders. What would you tell them? Where should they be focusing their energy?
I'd stress the importance of a long-term vision. Mining is important right now, yes, but what happens when copper prices drop? Because they will, inevitably. What happens when climate change further disrupts water resources, which are already strained and essential for mining operations? They need to be thinking about diversification, investing in renewable energy sources, and building a more resilient economy that can withstand these kinds of shocks.
It's like you're saying, don't just ride the wave, learn to surf.
Exactly. You got it. It's about creating a sustainable model for growth. And for me, that starts with investing in people.
Okay, I like that idea. Tell me more about investing in people. What does that look like, specifically for Zambia?
Well, it means prioritizing education and skills development. A well-educated workforce is absolutely essential for any economy to thrive, especially in today's rapidly changing world. And we're not just talking about technical skills. It's also about critical thinking, problem-solving, creativity. Those are the kinds of skills that allow people to adapt and thrive in any environment, no matter what challenges come their way.
That makes a lot of sense. But how do you actually ensure that education leads to real economic opportunities for people? I mean, what's the point of having a highly skilled workforce if there aren't jobs for them to fill?
That's the tricky part. Zambia needs to create an environment that encourages entrepreneurship, attracts investment, and supports the growth of small and medium-sized businesses. It's about giving people the tools and the opportunities to create their own futures, to build something new, instead of just being reliant on one industry.
So it sounds like Zambia is kind of standing at a crossroads. One path leads to continued reliance on mining with all of its inherent risks and limitations. The other path leads to a more diversified, resilient economy driven by innovation, human capital, and sustainable development. What do you think, listeners? Which path would you choose for Zambia?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no easy answer. But that's also what makes this whole situation so fascinating to me. It's a complex challenge with no simple solutions.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Zambia's economic outlook. We've talked about the potential of the mining sector, the challenges of debt and drought, the importance of diversification, and investing in human capital. It's clear that Zambia has a lot to offer, but there are also some serious hurdles they'll need to overcome.
And let's not forget about that Zambia-Tanzania interconnector project we touched on earlier. Access to affordable and sustainable energy could be a real game changer for Zambia's development. It has the potential to create jobs, improve living standards, and boost economic growth across multiple sectors, not just mining.
Absolutely. It's not just about keeping the lights on. It's about powering progress and creating opportunity and a brighter future for all Zambians. But as we've discussed, there's no one-size-fits-all solution, no silver bullet. It's about making smart choices today to build a more resilient and prosperous Zambia tomorrow.
It's a balancing act, really. trying to navigate the complexities of global economics, the growing threat of climate change, and a whole host of internal challenges. Zambia absolutely has the potential to become a real African success story, but it's going to require careful planning, strategic investment, and a commitment to sustainable development that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
And it's a story that's still being written, which brings us to our final thought for our listeners today. If you were advising Zambia's leaders, what would be your top priority for ensuring sustainable and equitable economic growth?
Would you double down on mining, hoping to ride the wave of high copper prices? Or would you push for diversification, spreading the risk, and investing in other sectors with long-term potential? Would you focus on attracting foreign investment or on empowering local entrepreneurs to build businesses from the ground up? There are so many different factors to consider, and there's no one right answer.
But that's what makes this so compelling, isn't it? It's a puzzle, a challenge, an invitation to think deeply and critically about the forces that are shaping our world. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, we encourage you to keep exploring, to stay curious, and to remember.
The world is full of fascinating deep dives waiting to be discovered.
It feels like we've been poring over this giant, detailed map of Zambia's economy, We've seen the mines, the power lines, even zoomed in on people struggling with poverty, those hoping for a better future. But now, it's time to step back. Look at the bigger picture. What's the takeaway here?
Yeah, this deep dive, it's just scratching the surface. There's so much more to consider. Geopolitics, how global demand for copper plays in, technology, whether it helps or hurts Zambia's progress. It's a long list.
It's a lot to think about, but I think what strikes me is that Zambia's future isn't set in stone, right? It's not just about riding the wave of a mining boom. It's about making choices, shaping their own destiny.
Absolutely. They've got potential, that's for sure. Could become a real success story. But it takes work. Careful planning, smart investments, and that commitment to sustainable development, the kind that benefits all Zambians, not just a select few.
And that's where our listeners come in.
Right.
We've laid out the landscape, talked about the challenges, the opportunities. Now it's your turn to think about it, form your own conclusions.
Exactly. What would you do if you were advising Zambia's leaders? What needs to be prioritized? Attracting foreign investment or giving local entrepreneurs the support they need to build something new? Should they aim for rapid growth or focus on sustainability?
So many questions. And no easy answers, that's for sure. But that's what makes it so interesting, right?
It is. It's a complex issue. No simple solutions. But this deep dive, hopefully it sparked some curiosity, giving you a way to understand what's happening in Zambia. But the exploration, it doesn't stop here.
Exactly. So for our listeners who want to keep learning about Zambia's economic journey, where should they start?
I'd say go beyond those headlines. Really dig into the details. Look for reports from different sources. Explore the data on economic indicators. And most importantly, seek out the voices of the Zambian people themselves.
That's a great point. It's easy to get lost in the numbers, the analysis, but this is about people, their lives, their dreams for the future.
So much of what's out there focuses on what experts and outsiders think Zambia should do. But hearing from the people who actually live there, understanding their hopes, their fears, that's where the real insights are.
Well said. And with that, we've come to the end of our deep dive into Zambia's economic outlook. We covered a lot: mining, debt, the importance of diversification, the need for sustainable development.
And let's not forget about that Zambia-Tanzania interconnector project. Access to affordable, sustainable energy could be a real game changer for Zambia. Create jobs, improve living standards, boost economic growth, and not just in the mining sector.
It's bigger than just keeping the lights on. It's about powering progress, creating opportunity, and building a brighter future for everyone in Zambia. But as we've discussed, there's no easy fix, no magic solution. It's about making smart choices, thinking long-term, and working to create a Zambia where everyone has a chance to thrive.
It's about finding that balance, navigating global economics, climate change, all those internal challenges. Zambia has the potential to be a real African success story, but it'll take planning, investment, and a commitment to sustainable development that benefits everyone.
And that story, it's still being written.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, here's something to think about. If you were advising Zambia's leaders, what would be your top priority for ensuring sustainable and equitable economic growth?
Would you focus on mining? Diversification, attracting foreign investment, empowering local entrepreneurs. There are so many things to consider. No easy answers.
But that's what makes it so engaging, right? It's a puzzle, a challenge. It makes you think about the world, how things work. So, as we wrap up, remember to stay curious, keep exploring.
Because there's a whole world of deep dives out there just waiting to be discovered.
That's it for today. Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll be back soon with another fascinating deep dive. Until then, keep those minds engaged and keep exploring.
Are you ready for this? Oh,
Like it like that. Hey yo, listen.
drop it low to the flow. Oh, oh.
Like it like that.